and we're back after a long break. We have another edition, and that is Asa Kaur. Welcome, Asa Kaur. Sat Shri Akal.
Sat Shri Akal, thank you so much.
Asa Singh, what did you watch, consume, read, do this week?
I've been watching some YouTube tutorials. You'd be surprised at how much knowledge, like random knowledge, there is on YouTube. Like if you wanted to fix a tumble dryer, for example, which is what we had to do this week, ours broke, and I thought it's been like 15 years since we've had that thing, and thought, what could we lose by trying to open it up and see how it works and see what was broken. It turns out they're very simple to fix. It's just a drum with a belt around it attached to a motor. After opening it up, it was just a case of replacing the belt, and had a YouTube video for that. Watch that, replace the belt, and it's working again.
Have you seen what they do with old washing machines when they take out the drum?
They put a rock
and they
in
use it as...
Oh no! I've been watching a different video.
People are using the inside of washing machines as fire pits. I thought that was pretty cool.
But if anybody needs a tumble dryer fixing, let me know.
You're going to get loads of phone calls.
I was watching this video. There's actually some really good videos on Business Insiders, a channel on YouTube, and they show like different production techniques of things, maybe lost techniques or things that like you would never know. And there was one where it was showing how there was these old like relics and techniques of how to create like bronze, or it was like bronze or copper, I can't remember what the metal was, statues. And the way they would do it is they would make the like whatever figure they wanted to make out of wax. They'd make it out of wax, and then they would cover it with a certain type of clay. They would cover it with the clay, and then they would melt the like what they've made. Slowly, the wax would melt out, so it would create like a negative of what they was going to design, and then they would fill it with the metal, and like it was this thing that these families had kept going in this city. It was somewhere in Africa, and because of the popularity that they had gained, a lot of the ones that were stolen, like during World War II and prior to that, they had actually got back like quite a lot of them from the different like museums around the world. And even one of them was V&A.
So Asa Kaur, what have you been watching, reading, consuming?
So I was actually interested, this is quite random, but Burek, the thing you get on top of burfis, it's like a
the aluminium foil,
edible silver.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I was thinking about how I was eating a piece of burfi, and I was just thinking about how it's produced. And I know in India there was this huge campaign to basically list it as not vegetarian, because the pieces of silver, they're put in between like a leather casing, and then they basically like press on the leather casing for it to then become burek. So it's not technically vegetarian. So I wanted to see whether that same practice was still in use. So I watched not a documentary, it was more just like a factory footage on YouTube that you can see. And yeah, pretty much most of the people still are using leather casing. So that made me think, whether you would actually want to even consume both, because technically you're using an animal product to create it. Also reading a really interesting book, actually, Law of Mentalism.
But the burfi thing, Asa, it makes you think, like Diwali's just gone by, right? I'd be interested to know how many people unknowingly bought a box of burfi with the little foil thing on top.
There's two types now, isn't it? There was some that they still use the old technique with the leather, and there's some where they don't, but I might be wrong.
People in the world, they think of India, they think of, they worship cows. It just goes hand in hand, it's synonymous. I thought that is a really big misunderstanding. That was a political movement, and I actually I think that was actually based on our cultural assets, on Namdari Sikhi cultural assets, and what our Sheids gave us. I think the first time that our community revolted in that way, and they stood up for the cows in the way that they did, that shook India. And a lot of communities that were looking for ways to, shake the British Raj, when they heard about what had happened, they decided to, deploy the same methods. And that's what really built the basis of the cow protection movement, which legitimized India's responsibility, politically speaking, religiously speaking, towards the cow. So it was that actual movement, which is, they were like, the Hindu community really came on board, and they said, no, look, this is our religious right. So, we have to protect the cows. And they really embraced it after. This could be a bit controversial, but this is, going back and reading about these things, this is what I believe, because it was truly in those years and after the initiation of the cow protection movement that really happened, and people really started to, India really became branded as a cow loving nation. So it was actually a political movement.
That's 100%. I think there was some context there as well. Like, the only thing that was reserved for a death sentence in Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji's kingdom was the slaughter of a cow. That's the only thing that held the death sentence. You've gone from that to then opening up a butcherkhana right next to Harmandir Sahib. Like, imagine, well, that was a straight challenge to the Anak of the Sikhs. And you have to remember, the early Sikhs of Sadhguru Ram Singh Ji, they were all soldiers in Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji's army. So in terms of, I guess it goes back to what we was talking about in terms of Swabhiman and knowing who you are. I think you're right, Benji. I think there was a deeper cultural element to it, and it's like just being boiled down to, oh yeah, you bow down to cows. I don't think it's as easy as that.
Pressures that you face from the British, the pressures of British culture is such that, okay, we'll have a steak and pie, chips and whatever on the weekend, and that's just like normal, right? Whereas in India, that's just not, it's not done, right? So them bringing their ideologies, bringing their way of thinking to India, it changed the way that Indians thought at the time. And I mean, introducing this in their schools, in their Christian missionary type churches, and that they established in India must have been a real tough time for Indians at the time.
But in order to destabilize a society, you have to take away their education, and by introducing Western education to the Indus people, being able to influence a younger generation, because the British had this perception that these people are animals, right? Because they saw this practice of sati, and like maybe other things as well, that the two things didn't correlate. Like, we treat our people equally well, but they've got like this caste system where the lowest of the low are treated like shit, and then there's like human sacrifice that these people are doing. These people are barbaric.
When Alexander the Great came to India to essentially expand his kingdom, and when he arrives, due to treachery and essentially unethical practices in war, he defeats Raja Porus. And when they're surrounding him and they've got him on the floor, obviously the first thing the loser does is try to essentially put their foot on the loser's chest to show their dominance. And Alexander the Great, obviously then in India mainly known as Sikandar asked Raja Porus that, what would you like to be done to you now? And his response was, do that what a king does to a king. And he heard that, and he was like, that's the first time I've heard that. Like, any other time, people start begging for their life. And his response was, do that what a king does to a king. And he's like, okay, if this is what their king is like, I'm not going to be able to rule over his people. And at that moment, he was like, okay, it's not in my benefit to actually kill him. I'll keep him as a high-ranking general under my rule, so that actually his subjects actually will even listen to me. So there's an element of that where the people of India had these examples, and it was kind of there in the psyche.
I'm going to ask you guys a question. So I think we've all been through the British schooling system. When you were younger, did you ever, like, when you were at school, did you ever question what was happening around you and be like, I don't know why this is happening? Or did you do things to fit in at all?
Yeah, I think as a kid, like really. I don't think. Well, I didn't. I certainly didn't reflect on like why things were a certain way. It was just either. It was more like black and white, wasn't it? Like, this is how things are. You never really. I don't think as a child you have that. I don't know. Maybe some kids do. Like I see some kids now who are really like very deep in their reflection. I was definitely not that kid.
No.
But it was more as a kid, you just wanted to fit in. Like you wanted to have a group of friends that you enjoyed like having a laugh with, basically. And it was, if you didn't fit in, then you were bullied. It was no like, or you were lonely. You know, you sat at the dinner table. Oh man, that guy's a loner. You know, so it was always like, oh, I don't want to be the loner. I remember in PE, for example, like depending on your interests, like obviously football is a big thing in the UK. So everybody was into football, right? And if you couldn't play football, then you were like, you weren't really in the inner circle. But if you had different interests, like my dad was into running, so I had like a pair of running shoes that I could go running with, my dad. But I'd wear those running shoes for PE. And back then, like Nike Copper 90s were like a big thing, like a big 90 on the football shoe. Don't know if you remember that. But if you didn't have those shoes, you weren't considered like the cool kid. So having branded like things like that, maybe Nike, I don't know. But I remember it being in PE wearing my running shoes and somebody coming over to me and be like, what are those fake like shoes that you're wearing? I was like, oh man, like as a kid you're like, whoa, I felt that. And I remember going home and be like to my mum, I want a pair of Nikes just so I could fit in, you know. And I don't think that's abnormal to how kids feel today, maybe.
But let's scratch that itch a little bit. Why do we want to fit into society? What is that? Because that's comfortable? Is that because, I mean, I'm thinking myself, right? So why would you want to fit in? You wear a certain, you know, when you go to work, you wear certain clothes. When you're out with friends, you wear certain clothes. When you go to eat, you do certain things. It's like, why? I mean, as a human, what psychologically is happening when we try to fit in?
I think it's the path of least resistance. Right? Let's take water, for example. Water wants to take the easiest route back to the ocean. And like in life, we don't want to be challenged. We don't want to be approached or objectified. We just want to fit in. Like it's the easy route, isn't it? Like if you dress a certain way or you appear a certain way, or if you have an opinion, you know you're going to be challenged.
I mean, on that, then Guru Nanak Dev Ji went completely against the grain then. But, you know, the hypocrisies that they not just challenged, but lovingly sort of had discussions with people and actually talking to people and having that communication, conversation streams open. I think that is kind of what we're missing the point on by having, you know, like, oh, okay, if I didn't have those copper 90s, or if I didn't have those shoes or that jacket, that whatever, that I'm not fitting in.
One thing that always shocks me is anybody, when you read the Siddh Gosht, when you read it, Sachi Pashi is challenging these Siddhs. And anybody that doesn't know, similar to actually Benji, what you were saying around these mentalists, essentially it's a similar kind of school of thought, I guess, where through their meditation, through their practice, they want to gain these kind of occult and spiritual powers to show that they've made this kind of progress in their spirituality. And that's what they thought was a sign of their spirituality and a sign of that they've achieved something in this life. And Guru Nanak Dev Ji goes there, and one of the Siddhs, they start floating in front of him. So one of the powers that they had is that they could elevate from the floor. And Guru Nanak Dev Ji grabs the Siddh's asana and just grabs him and pulls him back down and says, talk to me. None of this is going to do anything. It doesn't mean anything. And at that time, I was thinking, like, whoa, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, like, he didn't care. And when I looked into it, Sachi Pashi was 16 at that time. He was only 16 years old. And I was thinking, that's probably the age where we're struggling the most, actually, around that age, like when your teenage years start. And like, what a beautiful example for us, right, where Sadhguruji is going and challenging these people. It's just actually being convinced that you have that ability to challenge what you're seeing. I was watching a TED talk by a comedian. It was actually a beautiful talk. His name's Amit Tandon. And the title of the talk was Peer Pressure, the Slowest Suicide. And with anecdotes from his life, he says, do you know what it was? For me, it started when I was 1 year old. And I was like, how did it start when you was 1 year old? And he was like, when you're little, I wasn't very good at eating calmly. I used to love playing with my food. And he's like, one of my earliest memories, whether he remembered it or not, but it's a good example. He was like, the first thing I hear my mum telling me is like, why can't you eat your food like those kids eat their food? Like, why can't you be calm like those kids? And he's like, it ingrains from such an early age this comparison of you are doing something a certain way, compare yourself to other people, and gauge yourself to that through that comparison. And I thought that's such a perfect definition of peer pressure, is you gauging yourself through the definition of other people, and then you're chasing something that actually isn't real, because what is that gauge? It's either what is social and what is trendy at the time, but that's changing all the time. So it's something you can't really chase or grasp, which probably why it leads to no satisfaction, and why probably he said it's the slowest suicide.
I watched that same TED talk, and
it's quite good, isn't it?
I thought it was brilliant. What I really liked was how he basically talked about how I resonated with that, like as a child. Hey, if you don't finish your food, then you're going to get left behind, or look at how she's eating or he's eating. And then I really liked how he also turned it. So he was like, well, you know, if there was something I wanted to purchase or maybe something I wanted to do, and I was like, well, my friend's doing this, I want to do this. And my mum or dad would be like, if they're all going to jump down a well, are you also going to do that? Are you going to follow them? So he also portrayed it in the like opposite sense as well, which was really nice.
He gave such a funny example, Benji. I don't know if you remember. He gave such a good example. I loved it. Just when you were saying that, it reminded me, because I actually had forgotten it. He was saying that when I was younger, I had a friend. He gave the name of the friend as well. I've forgotten the name now. But he was saying that he wasn't good at school, and because he didn't perform well at school, his parents told him not to be friends with him. and actually distance yourself from him, so that because it will have an impact on your school life and like you doing well. And he was like, I did that. I was like, okay, fine. And he says, I ended up doing well. I ended up going to university. I got a degree. I think he was an engineer. I think he said.
Yeah.
He was an engineer. Yeah. And he's like, look, I done really well in terms of my education. And he's like, while I'm doing all of this, during those years, he had failed his, like what they call barmi, which is essentially our A-levels. He's failed all of that. And he says he's gone into, was it catering? I think it was catering.
Wedding business.
Yeah, it was like a wedding business, yeah. So he says by the time I finish my degree, he's got like these 3 wedding palaces that he's renting out to people. And by this point, he's incredibly wealthy. And he's like, at this point, I finished uni, and my mum says to me, oh, do you know that boy? You should be friends with him. You've got sisters. We need to get them married. It's good to have those kind of people in your friend circle. And he's thinking, what do you want? Like when I was younger, you told me one thing, and like now I'm older, you're telling me another thing. I thought it's such a good example of how our standards change, and I think it's such a good representation of peer pressure and social pressures.
Positives of peer pressure is if you know how Salguji says, I mean, many times, countless times in Gurbani, is to join the Sadh Sangat, right? So joining Sadh Sangat is actually like a positive form of peer pressure, right?
Well, she says you ask each other how your businesses are doing normally. It's like very common. If you keep your ears open during when the Sangat are eating langar, if you like gauge the types of conversations that are happening, most of the conversations are like that. And Satyapraya says, how many of you ask each other what time you woke up? Or how many of you are asking each other, have you done your Japji Sahib the Path today? So that's one of the ones I wanted to mention as well, is that there's actually that kind of pressure, I think, even though in some cases maybe somebody could argue it could become too much, but yeah, like I think it's an example of you can push each other, like you can, especially if you know you want to be like pushed. Like we speak about that. Like Benji, always telling each other, okay, we need to push each other so we do more nitane, and like we wake up at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. Like during the Dora, it was wonderful to connect with people in the Sangat. Everyone was, I guess, feeling quite spiritually rejuvenated, and we were having lots of lovely conversations. I learned so much from so many people. But then, I don't know if I can say the same on like a normal kind of weekly program if I was to go. So I think it definitely depends. And I'm not talking about Sad Sangat when I say this, but like I've always been mindful of the Sangat I keep, right? So like the people around me, just in general as well. And the people very commonly advise other people to be mindful of the group of friends, or you want to keep, the type of supporters you have, or the people you have around you. You want to make sure that they support you, they encourage you, and they aspire you to do better. So I think that is really important, and I definitely rely on that kind of support from my friends and from the people around me. So when you have a conversation with people, new or old, could be a new person or the oldest of friends. Sometimes you walk away feeling elated. Sometimes you walk away feeling, a bit deflated, a bit low. Maybe they said something, maybe their mannerisms or their behavior was a bit strange towards you. And, I've been thinking about why that happens. Why do you feel negative, or what is it? And I was having a conversation with a friend who was telling me that, that's you. That's because they've identified something in you, and you're just projecting. You feel like maybe they've said something to make you feel bad, but they've not actually said something to make you feel bad. You've just listened to something, you've heard something, and you've thought, oh wait, why don't I have that? Or why wasn't I able to, maybe articulate in that way? Or one thing, anything, it could be anything at all. And that's why you're feeling low, and you need to, work on yourself. That's a way for you to, identify something that's maybe missing, and for you to work on. So, yes.
In that scenario where Benji, you're completely right. Sometimes we're projecting something that we haven't worked through within ourselves. But I think there's other examples where actually people generally in your life are going to be unreasonable. And at the end of the day, like, even though we are all spiritually equal, because the one Atma is that of Paramatma and that of Akal Purukh. However, practically in terms of our karam, there are going to be people that have elevated karam. And it's what leads, like when you meet a Mahapurush, or even simple as you meet your parents, you're never going to think of yourself as equal to your parents, or you're never going to think of yourself as equal to your guru. But going from there, that because they've said things to you, or they've taught you things that have allowed you to develop. But it's like what Sagri said recently, at a kid, one of the kids, they are such a samdarsi and samvarti. So samdarsi is to be able to realize that everything is one. Samvarti is having the knowledge that, but you can't deal with everybody in exactly the same way. And samvarti is so important to understand, because it's like such by saying, in life you're going to see loads of roses. However, you have to realize that as part of that beauty that is in the creation, it also has thorns. And when you can realize that the beauty of the gulab and you being cautious around the thorns is essentially the same thing in a roundabout way, I think that's what leads to your spiritual progress.
One of the other things that I think in society is this European beauty standard that sometimes we all have a pressure to kind of meet.
I think we spoke about this in previous podcasts, but when you start getting a beard and you get a bit older and your beard gets a bit longer, that a lot of people don't realize that naturally a beard grows longer on one side. And I never knew that. Nobody ever told me that.
Really?
Yeah. And I realized like now, because when you comb your beard, it's not as noticeable. But it's literally like
lopsided.
Really?
And I was thinking, what's like going on? Like, do I need to rub like more badam rogan on one side, like to get something wrong? And in those moments, you do start thinking that, hopefully nobody judges me for that, even though it's just fleeting. Like, I don't really care in the grand scheme of things.
But it's that perception of neat and tidiness, isn't it?
Yeah,
like, why do people wear suits? Like, why is that a thing? It's considered, it's tailored. There's like a thing to it. There's a form to it, a shape to it.
like
Do you know what I
quote
mean?
unquote clean shaven. I think was
Yeah,
listening to
yeah.
Sant Hari Singh Ji Randawe Wale, and he was saying, "Oh, I used to say the word clean shaven, and the youth around me from this country used to say, can you please not say clean shaven, because they're trying to say that those that are clean shaven are more cleaner than us." And sometimes, yeah, when you look at it, a lot of when you see people, especially talking about body hair, it's especially when you look at the like kind of European beauty standard and what pressures were put upon us. It's like, okay, hair is seen as unhygienic, which I don't think is fair.
We need to take it into context of where we're brought up, and I don't think the same thing is of happening in India, right? So I think what we face here at school growing up, I mean, we were lucky, and I think we spoke about this earlier, we were lucky that when we hit sort of 18, 19, well, especially me, all of a sudden growing a beard was like a cool thing to do. It was like one of those things where, okay, you got a beard and a man bun and you're like, you know, you're the latest thing in fashion. But we got to actually realize that more than looking good for society, one is looking good for yourself and actually feeling proud of what you look like. Two is also how you would think about walking into your guru's darbar and looking at your guru at their standards, at what standards they've set for us.
So one, you
for it.
said it's not happening in India. I disagree with that.
I disagree
I
with
think
that as well,
I think
yeah.
it's happening more in India.
It's more in India.
really?
Yeah,
When we were doing the
100%,
research for this, right? Fair and Lovely. It's so
Oh,
racist.
yeah, okay.
yeah.
They've
It's
literally
worse
got-
in India, but it's way worse.
Really?
They've got
do you know what?
creams.
Do you know what happens in India? They take what's happening here and they times it by 10.
Amplify it.
Like Eurocentric beauty standards. If you want to do something, do it for yourself. I think, right? Do it if it makes you happy, and if it's aligned to who you are as a person. I definitely agree. I think it's worse in India. I think unfortunately, they have to try and conform to standards. They can't even change like height.
That question that you asked there, like understanding who you are. So that question, if we break that question down, who are you? Like, where am I gonna go? Like, who am I if I'm not your sevak? Like, who am I if I'm not your Sikh? Without you, I've got nothing. I've got no one. Being able to answer that question for yourself, who am I?
It's like by Manjaji, isn't it? Like anybody that reads by Manjaji Sakhi, anybody would think that Satyapashi was proper mentally torturing him. And he stuck with it, and look at the var that he asked for. Andro Kechasi, within his heart, he wanted to become a Sikh of Sadhguruji. And he goes to do Arju that make me your Sikh. And Satyapashi says that that's not as easy as you just asking. Are you sure? And Bhai Manji is adamant. He says, yeah, I want to become your Sikh. Satyapashi says, are you sure? Sara ko chadna padna. You're going to have to leave everything.
But you've lost your family, wealth, friends, family, and then
But
you're going
yeah.
to repent afterwards.
Yeah, you're going to
I
repent.
became a Sikh and
Mera sara bigaad deta. And a lot of the Katha Vachaks, they related to Bhai Mani Singh Ji. That Bhai Mani Singh Ji never complained to Guru Gobind Singh Ji. By coming to you, what have I gained? I lost half my family. And the first seva that he's given is to do seva of the langar, and to go collect wood from the forests and bring it to essentially power the fire that creates the prashad for the satsangat. And he eats langar of the Gurukar. Sadhguruji sends a Sikh and says to Bhai Manjaji, you don't work for anything that you're eating out of the langar. Why do you deserve to eat out of the langar? And Bhai Manjaji is thinking, what do I do? So he, instead of eating the langar, he starts eating the leftovers. Then Sadhguruji says again, why are you eating the leftovers? You're not worthy to eat the leftovers of the satsangat. So during the day he does seva, and then in the evenings he starts taking the balan that he dries, any extra balan, and he starts selling that. From the money he would get from that, he would buy a little bit of ration, make his own prashad there. And essentially,
and you have to think, like, how much can anybody earn through
from selling
right?
wood? Yeah.
So there'd be time where he wouldn't have anything to eat.
Physically, people thought that by Manjaji, he's like, people was shocked. Like even the Sikhs were shocked. Like, what kind of test is Satyapashi putting him through? And they're doing shukr that, thank God we're not going through that test. And by Manjiji, even though physically he would have seemed like that he is depleting, but mentally he had become very strong. And one day he's gone to collect wood, and it was dark, and he didn't realize that there was a well, and he's walked into the well. So he's kept it above his head, and he's stood in that position for a while. Nobody noticed Bhai Manji hadn't arrived. And the person that remembers Bhai Manji is not there is Sadhguruji. Sadhguruji tells the Sikhs to throw down a rope to bring Bhai Manji up. And Bhai Manji says, I'm not coming up first. Take the Guru Kar Ka Balan first, so it doesn't get wet, because it's needed for the langar. So they bring up the balan, and then they bring up Bhai Manji. And as soon as they bring him out, Sadhguruji hugs Bhai Manji. Bhai Manji charnate deke ke athru nikal rahe ne, he's crying. And Sachi Bhai says, I'm very happy with you, ask for something. And the first thing he asked for is, Sache Bashaji, the way you have tested me, may you never test another Sikh in this way ever again. We all owe one to Bhai Manji for asking for that. So yeah, relating it back to, I guess, what we're talking about, there's certain people that actually go beyond peer pressure. And when we read Anand Sahib, Bhagta ki chal nirali, chala nirali, Bhagta ke riyet margate jana. The people that walk on the path of Bhagati, their actions become so unique that even the world looks at them and think, how did they even do that? How did they rise to that occasion and rise above the world? And it's similar in that peer pressure talk on the TED talk that me and Benji were talking about. He says that there's actually a world that we don't know about that is beyond peer pressure.
One of the most common things that in our culture and society is, oh, loki ki kahange. What will people say? And you're so right, Juan. When you start this path of bhakti through devotion and love, and as Sadhguru Nanak Dev Ji says, Sir dije, kaan na kije. Don't worry about what people might say.
The person that was most annoyed and angry with Guru Nanak Dev Ji was their Pitaji. When you read Nanak Prakash, most of the prasangs are Mehta Kalu ji shouting at Guru Nanak Dev Ji that everybody said to me that I had this blessed son, Pandit Hardayal ji, on their birth, saying, I've read his Janam Patri, and this is the Roop of Akal. This is the Roop of Akal Purukh. We will have Jitna Chhatar Cholanage na de sarte, meaning most of the time when people hear those words, it's the words for a king. Mehta Kalu ji thought, oh, I had this son, I'm going to be rich. Guru Nanak Dev Ji, he would go, Khet bij auna, the khet would start growing, and he would invite all of the neighboring wild animals to come eat it. To have somebody like Guru Nanak Dev Ji as a son is having somebody who's 24/7 thinking inwardly. As soon as your son or your daughter stops caring about school and they say to you, "Main ta bandagi karni hai," you think yourself, "Kinne bande nu chinta hon lag jayegi." If anything, we'll do ardas to Guru Nanak Dev Ji, "Okay, fix my son." Oh, nakamma hai, he's not doing anything.
Yeah, the hypocrisy that we then live in our lives, in our families, is that what will everybody else say? What will everybody else think?
The earlier you know what your drive is, what your passion is, I think that's what solidifies a person. That gives you that basis for you to then accept and embrace your own individuality, and then I think you're not as susceptible to things like peer pressure.
And I think that's what Guru Nanak Dev Ji actually really helps with, is where Sachi Pashi gives a very good definition of what is nashwant, meaning what is ultimately a path of destruction, and what is like what you can say is upajao, or something that leads to development, or something that leads to growth. And I think at the start, for me personally, sometimes it's the things that won't make you happy, or the things you struggle with, is actually the things that will then lead to your happiness. But there's just that period of where it is tough. I don't know if I'm putting it correctly, but it's like similar to like going to the like for example, when you start doing push-ups, there's a point where I couldn't even do one. Right at that point, trying to get from that point to thinking, okay, how am I going to make progress? It is a path of pain, or like a path of struggle, but you do get to a point where that struggle or that path actually is what gives a sense of satisfaction.
I spoke to Pandit Yadavinder Singh Ji through this Dora. So I asked him, I go, how would you get around, you know, the pressures of life, and you know how, because I feel the West is always talking about, you know, oh, I need a holiday or I need a break, and you know, work's getting too much, and you know, everything is stressing me out. And he turned around and he goes, it's because you guys are so comfortable. He turned around and he was like, you know, everything that you've got here, you sleep on soft beds, you can walk around, you feel entitled, you feel, you know, that everyone should serve me, and everything is very self-centric here. There's a Saki, and Panditji didn't share this Saki with me, but there's a Saki of Sadhguru Jagjit Singh Ji. A Sikh asked Sadhguruji, you know, how do you only survive on 2 or 3 hours sleep a day? So, you know, they saw Sach Bashi all day at a Sangeet Batak, and at, 1 o'clock in the morning was their Ishnan. So if the Batak finished at midnight and they're getting up at 1 o'clock, Sadhguruji says to them, you know, so what do you sleep on? And they were saying, oh, I've got a nice big king-size bed, you know, it's so comfortable. And Sadhguruji goes, well, I sleep on, you know, just a piece of wood. And Sajbashi said to them, even that feels comfortable right now. Even that piece of wood feels too comfortable for me. So what Sadhguruji instructed their Sikh to do was create a bed out of different, just like, if you can imagine, like slats of wood, but all different sizes, so they're all unequal. So you don't know, if you turn this basa, that you don't know which side is going to be higher or lower. So it's like, imagine like a bamboo sticks. They're all different sizes, right? So when you lay them out, all the angles are going to be different. So Sadhguruji said, you know, make your life not so easy. So face those challenges. Dukh daru sukh rog paya. Now we always think that, you know, that dukh is your medicine. We read the English translation and it says that the dukh is your medicine, right? And the sukh that you is your illness, is your disease. But that dukh essentially is what we need to not strive for, but that challenge, that sort of where we're physically challenging ourselves or mentally challenging ourselves at all time is important.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you resilient, doesn't it? It helps build the resilience. Recently, I started gratitude journaling. So I started this, I say it's been like maybe a month, and I notice a really big difference. And I think it makes a really, really big difference. And to anyone who's maybe stuck in a rut, or maybe, you know, they feel like they're surrounded by negativity, or they feel like they're in a bit of a pit or a hole right now, I would really recommend it, because it just changes your mindset. You walk around and you automatically just start focusing on the positives.
Was it hard when you started? Like, what am I thankful for?
I thought it would be the hardest thing ever, but I couldn't stop writing. My hands started hurting, and I was like, "What's going on here?" Like, I started for maybe, you know, 5 minutes before bed, and it's the smallest things, like the tiniest things that I was like, "Okay, you know, this went well," or you know, "This made me smile," and you know, I saw a rainbow, and it can be anything, right? It's whatever brings you happiness. And it really seriously altered my mindset. And I noticed this the other day. I was having a really hard day, but, you know, I managed it better. And I thought, well, you know, how am I managing this better? And how am I still going to sleep happy? It's because I was just automatically focusing on the positives of the day. And, you know, I think it really makes a very big difference to a person, and it doesn't have to be long. I mean, I spend like 5 to 10 minutes doing it before bed, and in that way, you know, it's a way for me to truly be thankful to Sach Bashaji for all their bakshish and girpa, and it's really nice to actually write it and have just have it out there in the universe, like written. My mum's always taught me to, every time you do an ardas, you start off with something positive. You say thank you first for anything. Pick one thing, and then jitu kuch mangna mangla. If you want to ask for something, go ahead. But you must start off by saying thank you for this, because I feel like we're more prone to remembering Sadhguruji when something bad's happening in our lives, and then suddenly remember how to do Nam Simran properly, and you know, for 2 hours instead of one. And sometimes when I'm doing that in like my time of need, I feel terrible, because I think, why can't I be like this every day? Like, what's preventing me from having this same passion and the same drive to do Nam Simran for 2 hours every single day rather than 1 hour?
whenever I need you, other board names have already had on that. Like when I want something, that's it. Then then that's it. Malak odikas there, but otherwise, then we're all right.
Nothing can match that passion.
Hanji, bilkul, bilkul.
Yeah, I think viewing your life as half cup full rather than half cup empty. Definitely it depends on the type of person you are, whether you're a pessimist or optimist. Like Solab was saying, it's just really understanding how we live such an entitled and privileged life and just embracing that.
Throughout our Sadiwar, Guru Nanak Dev Ji is calling out peer pressure. So first you have the Lodi dynasty, and then you have the Mughal Empire starting with Babur. Guru Nanak Dev Ji is saying to the Pandits at that time that you conform to your invaders just to please them. That you wear blue to come across and try to be accepted. And I think even there Sadhguru is saying, why are you feeling that pressure? Like if your values is of something different, you not following those values, Sadhguru is saying that is hypocrisy. Why is there a need to do that? If you are who you are and what your customs are, why can't you maintain that?
It's been a good episode, guys. Thanks for that. I mean, the conversation has been really good. But before we wrap up, I want to ask, what fun facts have you guys found this week?
Looking at Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji and looking at when their Prakash Purab was. And then I looked at Mata Gujari Ji's Prakash Purab. And then I looked at Guru Gobind Singh Ji's birth. And just looking at all of that, and I did the calculation, and what a lot of people might not know, but Mataji was actually 40 plus when they had Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Jada Guru Gobind Singh da Prakash hoya. Mataji was 40 plus. Yeah, so I thought that was quite interesting.
Cool. Nice. What is the only animal that can't jump?
Chicken?
Is it a
chicken jump?
crocodile?
No. Crocodiles can jump.
Crocodiles can jump. This is so common, Benji. I love that you're doing this as well. We always question each other's facts. that don't make any sense.
What about a butterfly? It can only fly.
They can jump as well.
Butterfly can jump?
You saying that butterflies can jump has put your fact down the drain.
But the only animal that can't jump is an elephant.
Come on.
That was the stark contrasted ones. So, well, I don't know. Maybe you guys know this, but a honey-producing bee can only produce 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in its lifetime.
How many teaspoons?
1/12 of a teaspoon.
Not even one, John. Not even one. Not even half.
Like
1/12.
That makes you think, if you, like, whilst you're pouring out, if you guys consume honey whilst using it, even if you lose a drop somewhere, like, just think that's a bee's life.
It's a bee's life.
Life's
Puri jindagi di kamai. So mine is also a nature-related fun fact. Octopus, right? They've been observed to punch fish for no reason. They just go around punching fish.
So they just punch it and then fly away. I mean, that's away, sorry.
Fly away.
Did he say fly away?
Octopus fly away.
Suddenly evolved and grew wings.
We were talking about butterflies, that's why I was set up.
Chalo. It was a nice conversation, guys. Thank you very much for another episode, and we will catch you on the next one.